In this video, we're going to discuss the 3 ways you can declare and initialize a vector. So to do that, the first thing we have to do is pound include the vector class or library into our program. So we'll do that now. Then we'll move down to the main program. And let's create a vector of names. So to do that, we start off with the keyword vector, followed by the data type of the values we're going to store in the vector, which is string, followed by a name for the vector, and we'll call that names. When you declare and initialize a vector in this manner, no data is stored in the vector. We can verify that by trying to write out a value using subscript notation. So we'll write out names sub 0. I'll give you a little foreshadowing here. It's going to work, the code's going to work, but it's going to give us a runtime error at the end because it's actually a runtime error to try to access an empty vector. But let's go ahead and do it just so we can see. If you look up in the DOS window, there is no value displayed. Then we also have an error message, I'll bring it into view a little bit better here, saying that the program stopped working. So that's an error, but it does show us that you can't access the values from an empty vector, even the first one. A second way to declare and initialize a vector is to provide not only the name, but also the number of elements you want to initially store in the vector. So I put the number 10 in parentheses after the name to indicate that I want to reserve 10 spaces in memory for 10 names. Now when we try to access the first value, like so, build and run the program, there's still not a value there, but we don't have an error message. The third way to declare and initialize a vector is to provide not only the number of elements you want to store initially, but also a default value. So what I've done here is I've written names and then 10 comma empty string. Since this is a string vector, a default value would be the empty string. We'll keep the code to display the first value again, and let's take a look. Can't really see anything because empty string doesn't show a value, but we can be fairly sure that it's there. Here's what we could do instead, is put just an A as a default value. Not that you would do this in a real program, but it'll just show us that indeed the first value is an A, as you see there. And we could even go a step farther and verify that all the values in the vector are A's by looping through the vector as we did in the previous video by running a for loop and accessing each index position. So let's do that real quick. I less than names.size plus I cout. Let's do it like this. We'll write out the index position followed by its subscripted value from the vector, and then indel, this will get each value on one line. Build and run the program, and we see that 0 through 9 are all A's. It's not often that you'd want to initialize a vector to a default value with strings, but you might do that with numbers where you might want to start with all the values being 0 to indicate that something is going to be stored there, and if it's nothing there, then it's a 0. And then later you can replace that 0 with a value. So you've seen the 3 ways to initialize vectors. Let's go over them one more time. The first way is to declare and initialize a vector with no storage space initially reserved. The second way would be to declare and initialize the vector with a number of storage spaces reserved. And the third way would be to declare and initialize the vector with the number of storage spaces reserved and a default value to fit into each space. In the next lesson, we'll look at how to directly store data values in a vector.